Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm sharing a special video with you. It's an edited version of a live painting demonstration I gave to my Patreon members. We have a very nice routine in our community. Once a month we pick a subject to paint together, and for this project the subject was the market scene in Chivay in Peru. You can see the strong sunlight in the scene and shadows well, a really interesting challenge for us. We do quite a lot of preparation before the brushes touch the paper. The live session is always preceded by a Zoom call between us, and we use this time to discuss the subject at length. I think this is a very important stage. Every member has a little bit of input, and we talk about how to tackle the scene and what the composition should look like. It really does help everyone get ready, feel ready to paint. In this video, you'll see me painting the whole scene, the whole step-by-step process. At the end of the live event on Patreon, the members get to show their paintings too. For those that actually painted along in the session, they can display it on screen at the end. It's really wonderful to see everyone's results. Members also send a photo of their paintings to me afterwards for a critique. I hope you enjoy watching this demonstration of the Chivay market and you join the edited version of this just as I'm beginning to talk about the composition and just answering a few attendees' questions before we get started. Access to that whenever you want to. And I'll also make a YouTube version of it as well, if you prefer to play it back in that on that platform, in that system. So question from Ben: in your practice painting, the road went steeply uphill to foreground left. Was that intentional? That was this one here. The road went steeply uphill, foreground left. Yeah, oh yes, this bit of a slope. Yeah, it sort of happened by accident, Ben. In our source photo, which I will go through very shortly, it's all quite flat there. But yeah, I've got a little bit of an incline here, sort of goes up, which I think would be appropriate. If there's rain here, it's sort of channeled into the middle and comes down or goes up or down, whichever way you're looking at it. But yeah, that was sort of unintentional, that, but I think it actually worked out quite well with the crates there resting on that little bit of a gentle slope, and it assisted with these lines here, just kind of emphasizing that little bit of dip. So that may or may not happen on my live painting. Right, thanks very much for that, Ben. So yeah, there's our question section. Also, you will see the green source photo button down there at the bottom, so you can download, access the high resolution image, Chris's photo. I'll go into that very shortly. Yeah, I think it's time to start. So welcome everyone to this month's project. We are continuing our virtual trip around the world. We're back in Peru again, and as you may know, I select the monthly projects from your photos, and this time I've selected Chris Coleman's photo of a trip quite a few years ago, a trip to Peru, and the trail, the organized trail that people take on the way to Machu Picchu. And this is a stop off when you get acclimatized to the altitude. These stop off at, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, but Chivay in Peru, a very mountainous region. So let me just share the photo of Chris's scene and let's just walk through. Let's just zoom in a little bit more into this. Right. Now, we did talk extensively on our Zoom call a couple of days ago about different ideas that everyone had as regards how to handle this scene and things that you might change. It's quite a complex scene in areas, but in other respects is quite easy. So let me unpick the different elements for you. We've got these market stalls on the left, the road going up into the distance. Behind the market stalls, there looks like some storage sheds, some square signs there as well. We've got a little bit of perspective to deal with here of the angle of the tops of those sheds going down in the distance. In the background, we've got some fairly simple mountains, a smallish sky. Oh, there's some distant mountains over there. Right-hand side, we've got perspective with these 4 or 5 buildings going down on the right-hand side. There are some smaller market stalls on the right. There's a bit of everything going on here. We've got buildings, we've got mountains, we've got figures as well. Now, the figures in the market stalls, you can be forgiven for actually missing them. There's a seated figure here. There's a few figures down there rummaging around the stuff. But yeah, we're going to have some figures in there. There are 2 or 3 vehicles in here. We discussed on Zoom call this blue car, and it sort of catches your eye. So I might exclude that in the painting. Keep in the white van at the bottom, which I think would be quite appropriate to a market scene with the local traders coming and going and bringing their stuff and taking stuff away. We've got this flat roof building that a lot of you were uneasy with and didn't look quite right. And one of us quite rightly thought it was the top of a lorry or a juggernaut or something. But anyway, so I might do something with that. What else have we got? We've got shadows as well coming across. I should say the light is coming from the left-hand side. And yes, so we've got some nice shadows sprawling over to the right. We've got a bit of open area here, which I need to fill in with some figures. There are also some vertical aspects of interest also with the poles, the utility poles, left and right, and there are some cables that we can see there against the bright sky. So it's relatively straightforward, relatively easy. However, the difficult area is this sort of triangle here. So if you can see my cursor moving, this triangle here, down over to the left-hand side, then down here, top of the crates, and then along here. Within that triangle, I'll zoom in, there's all sorts going on. Bags, textiles, produce, more crates, half-cut veg or fruit, figures that we can hardly make out, bags hanging from a pole. We've got horizontal and vertical poles and rails. There's a tricycle there as well, distant figures. And we discussed this at length on our Zoom call about how we might tackle a very complex area like this. And if I could say from my point of view how I would do it is to think of simple shapes. All right, try and pick out the key shapes, the larger shapes in the area, either by color or value or edges. We've got above this triangle, we've got above this complex area, these tarpaulins strung across there in a haphazard fashion. So that's one kind of shape. And then below that, we've got other shapes appearing. For example, there's that dark bit of shade there right at the back. So try and think of that as a shape. This blue as well, maybe it's a little bit of a windshield or another sun shield for the produce at the back. There's these bags here in the shade, so think of that shape. There's that that there, the textiles hung up. What can we see further along? A bit of a light area there. Some more crates, looks like they're going down at a slight angle. And then some more horizontals going into the distance, and then right in the distance. Don't look at it too much, because the more you look at it, the more details you're going to see. So just briefly glance over this area and think of those shapes and values that you might choose and colors you might choose to, in a kind of loose way, depict those areas without being too fussy. So we know there's something going on there. Yeah, so it's going to be about this exercise, this project is going to be about composition, as always, from a photo, and learning what to exclude. For example, there looks like some kind of a figure or something there on the left. There's this parasol coming in from the right. Not going to include those. I've mentioned the blue car already, mentioned the flat roof building. So composition from a photo. Perspective again, as always in a street scene, perspective left and right. Simplification, that area there, how to simplify that area. We want to include some figures, so that will be another dimension to the project. We've got shadow shapes as well, the car shadows going across the road being created by these tarpaulins, and thinking about the shadows, the shape of them, the value and the colors. And I suppose lastly, trying to get that sort of Peruvian look and feel to the scene as well. So it's not just an ordinary market scene. We kind of can place it in the Peru area, high up there. I don't think it's in the Andes, but it's pretty close. Right, so let me go catch our Zoom call where we did discuss at length the various people's ideas on how to approach this scene. Let me go back to me. As I normally do, a little outline sketch of my sequence of the painting once I've done the drawing. So hopefully you can make out here the main objects. We've got the background mountain. We've got those sheds going down into the distance. We've got the grouping of the tarpaulin covers. We've got that complex triangle there. The crates, the sides of the crates facing us. The road here. We've got some figures. We've got the buildings on that right-hand side. So these numbers are what I think I'm going to, my sequence of paintings. So one will be the sky, pretty much covering a lot of the surface with an initial wash, just to get rid of the white paper, apart from the tarpaulin covers and some of the light areas in this complex area. Yeah, also painting the crates, painting the road. Number 2 will be those buildings on the side and the background mountains. Not too much detail to those. 3, the dark shadow on the side of the buildings. 4, that's the difficult one. 4, need to have my wits about me. 4 will be that complex area in there. And then 5, we've got to get some figures in, shadows going across the road. And then lastly, 6, details. Bit of information about my setup, my materials. My normal Saunders Waterford cold press paper, 15 inches by 11 inches. Paints, I'm using paints by Mark Jackman from the UK. They are professional grade, handmade watercolor paints. I've got neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, spring green, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, light red, cadmium orange, cadmium yellow, lavender, light Naples yellow gouache, and white gouache down there. Brush wise, I'll describe this as I use them, but a lot of the painting will be done with a medium-sized mop brush, a synthetic mop brush. yeah, that's my setup. So let me just see if there's any questions. I don't think there are. Right, I'm going to crack on then with the drawing, the all-important drawing, and getting in those main shapes. I think I'm going to start with those tarpaulins, the tarpaulin covers. Now, in the photo, they are going uphill. They're going up a little bit. I might have them a little bit more level, I think, but I will still have that one at the end, which looks like a more of a traditional parasol umbrella shape. Keep that one in. I'm going to start from about halfway down and just get in the outline, the top outline of all of these tarpaulins. And it doesn't need to be precise. It's fairly haphazard, and we want to just try and get the feeling of the nature of all of those tarps strung together. So I'm now on the bottom edge of these tarpaulins. There's a bit of a triangular shape folded over there. And then again, there's a folded piece here and a sort of rail going up slightly, and there's this yellow piece on the left-hand side, which is almost like a triangle. And just behind, we can see a sort of continuation of the sort of white tarpaulin cover that seems to be most of it. So they're mostly white, the yellow there, a little bit of a sort of creamish color here. Right, that's my tarpaulins. Buildings down the left-hand side. First of all, the tops of the buildings and the angle of those buildings is a little bit like that, fairly shallow, or maybe a little bit steeper, something like that. And we'll come in from the left-hand side, low pitch sheds there, and between them there's some squarish signs. Get another one in here. Of course, with perspective, they're a little bit smaller in the distance. Now, I'm coming into the area of that flat roof building in the photo. So I'm going to just continue those shallow pitch roofs there to replace that flat roof building. The mountains in the background, come down like that. We've got the buildings on the right-hand side. Those buildings are higher than the sheds on the left, and they're just really fairly straightforward there on the right-hand side. 4 or 5 buildings, but just try and simplify them a little bit. Main thing to get right is the angle of the top of the buildings and the angle of the bottom. So that the angle of the top is steeper than those on the left. So around about something like that. Generally going up on the level. There are some that are a little bit higher than others. We've got the white truck at the bottom. Quite a simple vehicle to do. A thin little white stripe at the top, then the windscreen. It's just bands really. So that's dark. That's dark. We've quickly got a vehicle there. And there's some simple parasols there on the right hand side. We get a few of those in. Now the all important bottom street level. So it's not as steep as the right hand as the top of those buildings. In fact, these buildings do actually go down a little bit more into the distance, and then we can't really see what's going on beyond them before the hills. Back to the market stalls and the wooden crates that are facing us. Now, just get in initially the overall shape of those, and the top of them, the top of those crates, they slope down a little bit like that to an area about a third of the way in. And then the bottom of those crates, almost horizontal, like that. And then we've got a sack of apples or something at the front. And then the individual crates. Now, the crates seem to have a couple of slats, and we can see about 4 crates altogether. Let's get those in. So there's my crates. They don't need to be equal length, but maybe at slightly different angles. And we've got a dart line. So I've drawn a sort of rectangle for the crate, but there's my 2 slats, all right, for those crates. And then supporting them, there's crates below that. And bits of darkness as well. Just lots of horizontal and vertical wooden slats, basically, with dark shadow between them. Now, we have to indicate where the fruit is going to be in the stall. So there's my, right at the front, what I think are oranges. There's more oranges back here, and maybe some apples as well. Just think of these sort of shapes. I wouldn't say draw each individual item of fruit, but that fruit and veg stall, the area of it is obviously from the top of those crates, and just think about the shape of the overall area there. Something like that. Now, other objects we can see. So the main shapes, there's something that's blue in there. So that's blue. There's some assorted sacks here. Then we've got more traders' booths, traders' stalls going into the distance. And then think about the right-hand edge of those stalls together with the shadow. So for example, starting from the furthest tarpaulin that looks a little bit like an umbrella, we can sort of come down and, well, we've got a bicycle there. I'll get that in a minute, but just trying to think about the shape of that overall area. So I'm drawing here the edge of those shadows as they're coming across, roughly like that. I might change my mind when I'm actually painting, but it's roughly like that. The very back of the street, bottom of the shed's over there, missing out that blue car. Right, some figures. Now, in my thinking, I was trying to get a sort of main figure in that position there, a larger figure in that position there, then some smaller figures in the distance. Think about perspective and the height of their heads about the same kind of level, all right, to help with the perspective. And let's get in, so those figures, let's get in one, about here. Now, I did share on Patreon in our post some assorted figures from a couple of members. So take a look at those. Let's get a female figure here. They're distinctive hats with the brims, almost like sort of bucket hats, elongated bucket hats and brimmed hats. So there's a figure there. Let's get in some other figures over here. And a figure carrying something. Shadow, shadow. There's a few sacks there. Let's get in another figure in here. And then my tricycle, which is in the photo, and it's around about here, but sort of silhouetted. So we get in a bit of the shapes, the rims of the wheels, and hopefully when we paint, they will look a little bit like one of the traders' tricycles. Let's get in another figure in here. So think about the heights of those heads, pretty much all level to make it look convincing from a perspective point of view. There are some traders within the stalls here. I'm not going to draw them, but I'm just going to, as I paint, I might create a shape that I can turn into a figure. So let's see what materializes from that. Just a little bit more definition to the buildings on the right-hand side and getting the verticals right in there, and perspective as well. Maybe we'll have more figures up there in the distance. Yes, I think that is about it. There will be some lines to help with the perspective. So get in a few of those there. Just sort of drawing your eye into the scene. The tops of the roofs of the sheds, need to get those in because they'll be quite light against the darker mountain. I'm not going to bother drawing in the vertical poles. I'll just wait to the end to see where I want to put those, but there's a couple on the left and there's more on the right, and a few of them just jutting up against the sky. There's actually quite a big flue or chimney here on the right, which looks a little bit like a pole, but I think it's a chimney just attached to a restaurant there. That is my drawing done. So on to some painting. Let me just see if there's any questions. Let me know in chat, anyone that's painting along with me, because towards the end, for us Patreon people, we'll do a show and tell towards the end. So if anybody is painting along or doing a sketch, I can, towards the end, I can open out the stage, as it's called. Okay, Bob's painting along. That's great. Ben, Fazia, excuse me, Fazia's painting along. So we'll do a show and tell towards the end. Right, painting then, the all-important painting. And going back to my plan. All right, so number one, covering most of the scene with some kind of wash, starting with the sky, over the air of the mountains, and just really painting everything except those areas that are going to be kept quite bright, the tarpaulins and some areas below those tarps. Starting then with my mop brush and a simple sky. I've got my water over to the right, so I'm just dapping my brush, and a very weak dirty blue, if I could describe it. So a little bit of cerulean and a little bit of whatever's in my palette, but something like that. And just, I haven't pre-wet my paper, but this very sort of weak blue with a little bit of color in it for those clouds. Now the light is coming from the left, so let's go a little bit lighter on the left-hand side. And that is pretty much it, down to those buildings and a little bit of light red for those rooftops that are catching the light. Down to the top of my tarpaulins, which I will follow my lines as best I can. There's a little bit of, for these sides, a little bit of yellow ochre. I might go darker for those sides, but just something to color in those. follow the main tarpaulin at the end. Oh, I might, round the van, I might paint around that as well, because that's a white van. Now, underneath the tarpaulins, the white, the bright area of those tarpaulins, and just some kind of a fairly neutral sort of color, partly part blue, part brown, just to cover that up. Over the fruit. Down to the crates. Now, a wood color for the crates. That's going to be, to get that wood color, well, I've got yellow ochre, little bit of burnt sienna, and tiny bit of a blue. Not too much though, a bit more yellow ochre. And let's see if that gives me a sort of that color of those wooden crates. So a fairly warm color for those. Now down to the road, and the road is a little bit cooler than the wood. So we need more of a blue in the mixture, a little bit of blue and a tiny bit of brown. So I'll go back to where I was mixing the sky here, and a bit of cerulean blue. It could be any blue. Tiny bit of burnt sienna. And with this road surface, we don't want it to be too perfect. So you could, like I did with the sky, I was dabbing in different colors and going stronger in some areas and lighter in others. Also, you could do a sort of dry brush. So I'm here with my mop brush, with the side of the brush and the texture of my paper, and following the lines of perspective, and getting in a sort of a sort of sense of the texture of the tarmac here. And it will dry lighter, of course. Over the figures. Around my distant tarpaulin, and then buildings on the right, and just covering up most of the scene. And that is pretty much phase one done. Just where the paint's accumulating a bit, I'm just mopping that up. It doesn't matter if you've got little bits of the paper unpainted. They could be turned into something later on. I'm looking for something in this area where I might have some extra shapes that could be made into figures. I could see maybe the top of one of those distinctive hats, or someone's shoulders, or something like that. Nothing is speaking to me right now, but we'll come on to that shortly. Right, let me just get out my hairdryer, everyone, to speed up the drying process. Otherwise, I'd have to wait maybe about, because it's quite damp there, I'd have to wait about a good 5 minutes for it to dry. So the next phase, I want to make sure it's absolutely dry, particularly this bottom area, otherwise I might smudge it. So just excuse me, my microphone should suddenly cut out when I turn this on. So here we go. Right, that should be okay now for me to do the next painting phase, which would be those background mountains, and do a little bit more to the buildings on the right hand side. Still with my mop brush then. Now, the color of those background mountains, to me, it doesn't look as if they've got a lot of vegetation on them. They're pretty sort of barren. And I guess being in the distance, we've got to make sure the value is right, not too dark, not too light, but dark enough to be making the lighter parts, these rooftops show up. So, and it will be not as dark as the shadow, the shady side of these buildings here. All right. So there is a more distant range of hills, mountains there, which are much further away. Let's go in with something like a yellow ochre, maybe a tiny bit of burnt sienna. I'm thinking now of these distant ones, these distant mountains, and put those in. Somewhere like that. That's those very distant ones. Now these nearby ones, darker, and well, a similar color combination. Burnt sienna, little bit of yellow ochre, and a blue. Let's get in a bit of ultramarine blue. And there's within the mountains, there are some little darker areas, little cracks created by, of course, the light coming from the left-hand side. Burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, go up to my outline as well. Make sure that doesn't show against the sky. Painting around the signs, although the signs, yeah, they're a little bit darker. than the background mountains. So I'm still going to paint around them though. Another roof there. Getting this bumpy top to those background mountains. Ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. Paint around another sign. Now when I come up to here, I want to make sure there's a hard edge there. So that's got to be dry there. And I'm coming close to it now. So it is a lot darker over there. Buildings right at the end of the street. That's the top, painting around the tops of them. Now we are coming to the bit of light red. We're coming to the very end. And we want to get a bit darker, create more of a contrast with the lighter distant mountains. So I'm going to intensify going a bit stronger with those colors, the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna, but particularly that ultramarine blue, and make the contour of that edge, make it quite bumpy like that. And then we've got to go down to connect with the buildings, down to the top of the rock. So I've gone a bit warmer. And then almost connecting with the buildings in the background. That's pretty much it. Keep it fairly simple, not too detailed. There are subtle areas of darkness in there where there's the little sort of valleys. So you could put that in with some darker paint, but not too much, otherwise it would just draw attention to that. Right, these buildings on the right-hand side. I'm going to change my brush now to a flat brush. I could use the flat edge of a mop brush too. Do you see that profile there? If I just try and make it a bit better. So I could use that to do these sort of bands, these vertical bands, to try and create the impression of those buildings coming towards us. I'm going to use a small flat brush just as an alternative to get that in. So we've got some grey buildings, an orangey building, lighter buildings as well. So I'll keep that one lighter there. This one I will have a more of a grey colour. And we're coming down to, right, there's a figure there. And then we've got a more a wooden type building here. Let's get in some of that almost similar color to the crates there, but a little bit of a blue in it. And we don't want to spend too much, more blue. Don't want to spend too much on the detail here, but just making sure that we've got the feeling of those bands of different building materials. And then we've got this sort of more orangey building on the right. So there's my different bands there. That'll do. Not too much detail. That's it then for the background and that right-hand side, except the details of the buildings on the right-hand side. Now for the shadow. So darker than the background mountains, the shadow on these buildings here. I'm going to go back to going to change brush back to my mop brush for this. And also notice on the buildings with the tiles, it's got a sort of serrated edge to it where the tiles are coming over into the shady area of the buildings. Now we want for the shady side of these buildings, we want a darkish gray, not too dark, because there are some dark gaps between these buildings, which I'll put in later on, but just getting in that grayish color. So let's mix something appropriate here. I use ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, but we're going in darker. A little bit of lavender actually in this. It's got to be darker than those mountains. Need to go darker still, possibly a bit of neutral tint just to speed up the process. Not too much neutral tint. If you've got neutral tint or Payne's grey, not too much. Don't overdo it. Right, so, but the value is the important thing, and also the profile of this. The profile of the edge of that roof there. We can just see a little bit of the roof highlighted on the other side as well, again with that sort of serrated pattern. Up to my sign and then down to the tops of the tarpaulins, where we'll go a little bit darker in there, where it's not getting so much light. And then over to the next building, cut around the sign, the light on the left-hand side up to sign number 2. And a little bit of darkness towards the bottom. Now, as I go down, I don't want to go too so dark. Maybe just lighten it up a tiny bit. Get a good edge on my end tarpaulin that's got that sort of umbrella shape. Little bit of light on the tops of the roofs, and then dark around. Now I'm encroaching on the complex area now, but just in a loose way going around that. I'll be connecting with this in a minute, down to the bottom of the street, around about there. And there might be a bit too much of the paper unpainted here, so I'll just cover up some of these little patches that I inadvertently left. A little bit of a shadow going across the car, or the lorry. So from that rooftop, let's go diagonally across like that, and I'll go in with some darker shadows in a minute. Right, that's number 3 then. Stage number 3 done. The dark of those buildings, bar any again some detail in there, and actually those sides. I think I'll make those sides just a little bit darker. Make sure I've got a good edge on my brush, and light on the left-hand side with the light coming from that direction. So light, left-hand side, a little bit of a gap there. Connect with the building. Okay, well, we're veering into the tricky part now, and those trade stalls, the traders and all of their produce and all of these shapes. So let's see how we get on. I'm going to paint in the fruit, the colors of the fruit first of all. Oranges, greens, yellows, that sort of thing in that area. And then we'll go on to the darker shapes. I've got to define those slats of the crates a bit more, going in dark between the slat to create the form of those. And then all of those shapes, the main shapes that we see underneath the tarpaulins, and then the shadows as well. Let's get in some color then for the fruit. Well, I've got cadmium orange. That would be very appropriate for those oranges, and cadmium yellow for maybe some lemons. I've got spring green for apples. Just wash off my brush. Let's start with the yellow. Actually, it's a bit too yellow. Let's have some apples in there. And then some oranges in here. And back, a bit further back in there. And we've got pumpkins and melons and all sorts of things going on as well. Some green now, more green. Might need to darken up some of this fruit, which is just being shaded a little bit by that tarpaulin there, I guess. But just continue on some of these brighter colors. Just to color those overall shapes. Right, now the darkness between these slats, which will then hopefully make them look a little bit more believable as wooden crates. You might want to choose a smaller brush for this. I'll stick with this brush because hopefully I'm going to get a good point to it. And something quite dark, so neutral tint, but not black, not charcoal grey. So I'm just going to add a bit of a color to it. So ultramarine blue, bit of burnt sienna, but something quite dark. And then those little the sort of dark gaps between these individual slats, and then there's an end to it. I'm just negatively painting around the slats to hopefully reveal these strips of wood. And then these ones on the end here are in the shade. So just make them a little bit darker. Might need to go a little bit darker on some of these crates too, particularly on the left-hand side. They're in a little bit more of a shadow than these. That one there, for example, is catching a bit of light. Now, these dark shapes in the background, underneath the tarps, we've got a very dark shape in here. So I will go in with my neutral tint. Not too much water on the brush, but that kind of dark shape there. And I'm just connecting with the fruit, and it is bleeding. One's merging into the other a little bit, doesn't matter. Right, there's a blue shape in here, which is there. So I'm going to pick up a cerulean blue. There. And it sort of disappears behind this shady side here. And let's get in some more darks. Dark in there. Now, something not too dark. A little bit of a blue at the end. And some wooden crates here. Oops, that's too dark. Some wooden crates there. Hopefully it will all look a little bit more believable as I fill in. Some of these areas need to be a little bit darker. The shady side of the tarpaulins coming over the a rail there. Right, shadows going across the ground. A shadow color I'm going to use is, well, it's almost the same value. It's similar in value to the sheds and the mountains, but color-wise, a blue and a brown, so ultramarine blue and a bit of burnt sienna. And then just creating now the shape of the cast shadow of those tarpaulins coming out. There's quite a distinctive one in the middle here. You can almost connect that figure there. Ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. This is where we're now connecting to the side of those crates. And this one actually comes out quite a bit as well. And then we got the shadow going a little bit at the bottom of those crates there. Now I need to make these crates a bit darker. So I'm going to glaze over them. That's quite dry now, but glaze over a darker wood color. So a bit of my burnt sienna, a bit of light red. So a darker wood color, maybe a bit of light on the top of the crates, but just glaze over the top of those, make them a bit darker. Get a good edge to your brush. And the wooden supports the crates there. They're a little bit darker. The wood there is a bit darker than the crates above. but generally they're all quite dark below, quite dark, acting as those supports. That needs to be darker still. Yes, beginning to look a little bit more crate-like. All right. While that's drying, I need to get in the darker sides here. That needs to be yellow. There's a little bit of a light yellow there. So let's get in the yellow of this tarpaulin here. Not bright yellow. And a little bit is catching the light at the top. And then a very weak yellow for a tarpaulin here. And then some of these sides of the tarpaulins, they need to be a bit darker. Like that for that one. And there's also some little folds in the tarpaulin as well. Give it the feeling of those little folds. And this is darker still. There. All right, while that's drying a bit, I'll add in some more details in a minute, but let's turn to the figures. Now, those figures, their dress, well, there's lots of reds, and blues. So just think about that. And the hats can be beige, dark. So yeah, that's the general color scheme that we're going for. Let's make this lady's hat a bit of a light brown color. And then we'll go in red with her top and her skirt. So bit of alizarin crimson in there as well. So quite a big top, almost like a sort of a shawl or a thick top, and then very thick, almost like a padded skirt in a way. And some of them have they've got check patterns or they've got stripes on them, but I'll just get in the main shape of the skirt there. And then the legs. shadow. Light coming from the left, and so connect the shadow with the legs. Then some figures in the background. Actually, let's make this one blue. This next figure, blue. And shadow for that one. Then another one here. Might need to go down to a smaller brush, actually. So a medium pointed round brush. Similar approach, the big top. And then the big billowy skirt and a shadow. Need to get in a hat for this one. So a brim. And then need to get in some flesh color for this lady. And come back to that one. Right, some darker figures in the background. I'm now almost going into the detail stage by doing this. So starting with these more distant figures here, I'll stick with this brush. It's got quite a good point to it. I could use an even smaller brush for these distant figures, but the main thing is that point, trying to get a good point, no matter what the size of the brush is. All right, so let's start with this figure here and connect with this tricycle, which it's got two front wheels. Two front wheels. There we are. Connect with the shadows. And then a back wheel. Some frame, an impression of a frame for the bike. While we're here, let's get in the windscreen of that lorry. or van, whatever. At the back there. That's quite a big van. So now to the detail of things going on in these market stalls. More distant figures silhouetted against the back of those buildings. We've got a few poles, supporting poles for these tarpaulins. Let's get those in. So again, make sure you've got a good point to the brush, and some verticals, horizontals. Now, as we come down to the fruit, we could just paint around the outer edge of that fruit to hopefully give the impression of a crate of fruit with this darker shading. Likewise in here. Let's see if we can get in another trader in here, another figure in here. Where can I put that figure? Could that be a hat here? So that could be a hat. The light hitting, and then perhaps this one is just looking that way. Let's get in another one. Where have I got some light? Perhaps here. Let's get a seated one in here. Make sure I've got a good point. Let's start with the hat. And the brim. And then the face. And body just beyond this sack of apples here. So that's the body, and then we've got the legs coming out. There we are. a trader. Now let's just define some of this fruit and these bags just a little bit more. So starting with these apples. So that's this sort of inner rim of those apples. And then the crates a little bit more. Right, these oranges here. This is the most difficult bit. But just pick out a few fruit and just observe the shape of the shadows between the fruit to define the fruit. So we're not actually painting every orange in this case, but just the shapes of the shadows between them. And then a sort of silhouette of other fruit in the distance. Right, next one along. And then these other oranges here. And lemons or something else at the top. Define some of these buildings a bit more. The just underneath the roof is a little bit darker, just underneath the tiles there. And then the signs as well, with a little bit of writing on them, but not doing individual letters, trying to create the impression of writing on those. Just marks. Looks like there's about 2 or 3 rows of writing for those. Keep going down. There's some darker shading between the buildings. And some pattern on the end of those buildings as well. But dark, a sort of thickish band of darkness defining the gap between some of these buildings. Right, these oranges here. perhaps a little bit more orange-like. You could, if you don't think they look like oranges, you could always go on top of this when this is dry, when the surface is dry, go on top with a thick orange color or a thick green color, and that would then give you still need the shadow between those blobs to make them more orange-like. But that shadow there, for example, that's not quite right. But that would be another technique to get that fruit back. Now, I don't want to put too much detail on these tarpaulins. I want to still make them look tarpaulin-like. All right, I think that's it for the market area for the time being. Let's now go over to the buildings and get some poles in. And just try and connect some of these shapes a bit more. Yeah, we need to get some more definition to these buildings. So I'll stick with this brush and a few verticals. There's some rather ornate windows on this one. Some ground floor windows. And then the windows there. Some sacks or something just in there. Some of these costumes need those stripes. Now we need some bit of shadow there under her arm and a bit above the arm as well. But some stripes. And get some more figures in. We need to fill in this space a bit more. I did draw on a distant figure down here. It needs to be a bit lower, but it's all right. Let's have another one in there. Okay. Right. Some lines on the road just to help with the perspective and drawing you in a bit. There are a few also going across as well. You're going across. This face needs to be a little bit darker. Okay, right now, some vertical poles. Vertical poles. Let's change my brush. This might be a little bit too thick. I'm going down a size or two to this brush and poles. Not too much water on my brush and ultramarine blue, burnt umber. Could use a little bit of neutral tint. And right, where should we have these poles? Well, there's one. Let's have one about there. And in the photo, it starts about there, but let's have it actually in the sky. Look a bit more appropriate. And it is. Let's have this on this side of the buildings, and then another one. Let's get three in. So we'll go a bit lower here, and then another one there. Likewise on the other side, piercing the sky. One there, and now some of the poles on this side, they're actually chimney flues, so they've got a sort of rusty look to them. This restaurant, for example, has got one and like a cowl or a cap on the top. There's rebar and things sticking out the roof, as if they're going to be building at some stage another level to those buildings. Very thin little lines. I need some more windows down here. Makes them a little bit more building-like. Some of these market goers, they need some bags, shopping bags. So let's get in a shopping bag for this one. Maybe another bag on the other side. I'm going to go in with some thicker color now. The technique I was telling you about, but some thicker color just for in these market stores, just where you can see, like in the distance, there might be some textiles or something draped over, and then maybe a little bit of color in there. But with this, with a thicker application of paint, we can make some of these oranges a little bit more vibrant, a bit more orange-like. A little bit darker in there, so in this shade a little bit more. We get some bananas in. I can see some bananas, so bunch of bananas. When I've got this yellow, just dotting a bit of color here and there. Right. What else can I put in? There is some shine on some of this fruit. When I'm going through the question, when I'm answering any of your questions at the end, I'll see if I can get some of those in. But let me now just go to a rigger brush and getting in some fine white lines and then some dark lines. And then, so I've got some white gouache here, bottom right corner. Let's just freshen this up a bit with my rigger brush and try and get something that's not too thin, not too thick. And there are some little horizontals here and there. Not knowing exactly what they are, but we'll just get in a few of those. There's some aerials or something on top of those buildings. Maybe some highlighting on a hat, a figure. And a few more horizontals down here just to show that something's catching the light. Also, a bit of light on some of these poles as well, vertical poles. Some flash color for some of these figures. And some cables between those poles. Sticking with my mop brush, sorry, my rigger brush, and make sure I've got a good point. So I've got some lines coming down to this nearby pole. and that's to that one, and then let's continue it on. Likewise on the other side. Don't go too thick. I think I'm nearly done, says he, resisting the temptation to dabble about with it more. I am going to add in some little white dots on the fruit here, just to make them sort of their shiny skin light up a little bit with the light coming in. But I'll do that while I'm inviting you, some of you, to come on screen. So if anyone now would like to make themselves known to me, if you want to come on screen, try and make these crates a bit more crate-like. Right, just create a bit of shadow around there. This tub of apples. Yeah, so I think I'm done. Right, let's just see if anybody would like to show or share with us, those of us on the live event now. If you'd like to put something in chat, then we can have a look, have a little butchers, and see what you've been up to. Whether it's just a work in progress or a finished painting, we'd all love to see what you've been up to. Right, let's start off with